think about Oppenheimer's struggle that he had with this thing that he had created that was ultimately going to lead to destruction of hundreds of thousands of lives, if not the entire human race itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which was very deeply based in philosophy, like his perspective and his struggles with it. I mean, if he was just like an automaton, like some, sociopathic, just super Alzheimer's guy, or that didn't not autism guy, rather, that didn't think at all about no concept at all about empathy, no concept at all about our perspective in the he would just plow forth ahead and just launch bombs. Like that's.
He would just plow forth ahead and just launch bombs. Like that's.
Hey friends, I'm Mike, a late diagnosed autistic adult, and today we're going to bust the myth that autistic people somehow lack empathy. A persistent stereotype is that of autistic individuals being cold or unfeeling. However, many autistic people are simply expressing empathy differently. Some might not display the typical facial expressions or body language that neurotypical people are expecting, but this doesn't mean that they aren't feeling empathy. Additionally, sensory sensitivities and social anxieties may lead to behaviours that are mistakenly interpreted as a lack of empathy at all. After all, a lack of empathy amongst autistic people would be alarming if it were true. There'd also be a strong evidential support for it, which there isn't. So, in this episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan is talking with a philosopher, and it's actually a rather good episode, other than this little trope near the start that even the guest didn't challenge him on. That's pretty disappointing to me, since these tired ideas hurt autistic people by spreading prejudice about them. It's a rehash of the fictional characters that are both scientifically brilliant on one side and yet have this horrible downside, like not being able to understand the emotions of others. Don't tell me you haven't heard of this before.
Like me, Raj is demonstrating empathy.
What is empathy to you? Just so that we're on the same page, let's define our terms. First up, we have cognitive empathy. For instance, this is your ability to know and understand what someone else is feeling. You might not feel it yourself, but you have a conceptual understanding of it. You know what someone else is going through. A friend of mine once told me about a really stressful day they had at work, and I listened, but I didn't immediately feel their stress too. I understood the weight of what they were telling me, but I usually go into this like troubleshooting mode when friends tell me about things that have upset them. And on occasion, it's had me compared unfavourably to characters like Taos. It's as though the other person is expecting to see a stereotyped emotional display from me, rather than have me genuinely try to listen to their feelings.
Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure?
Next up is affective empathy, and this is where you feel emotionally what other people are feeling. For instance, if a friend is in pain or distress, you feel those emotions yourself. Affective empathy can sometimes be overwhelming for us, especially for people who are more emotionally sensitive, say. For me, affective empathy can sometimes feel like I'm absorbing other people's emotions without consent. If someone close to me is upset, I find it hard to separate their feelings from my own, and I might end up just being utterly emotionally drained. One time a friend was going through a breakup, and even though it didn't involve me, I felt their sadness so strongly that it almost became my own. I had to step back to process the emotional weight I'd just suddenly found myself absorbing. Now, some people I know are going to do this to me. I find after meeting with them that they leave happier and lighter. I feel tired and wanting to crawl into a small space to recharge. It's as though on some level they've been an emotional vampire. Many autistic people find themselves in this hyper-empathy arena. And this can mean a form of hyper-affective empathy. Maybe that autistic person you think is being cold and distant is actually simply on self-preservation mode. Lastly, we have compassionate empathy. This is when I notice that someone's going through something difficult and I not only feel for them, but I want to help. So when a friend's been stressed out about work, I'll try and do more than just listen or offer advice. I'll check in on them, send them something to brighten up their day maybe, or offer practical help if I can. It's not just about recognising their struggle, it's about wanting to do something to ease it. I used to volunteer for cats protection and animal rescue organisations. This is a form of compassionate empathy. My issue was that I was spending more time volunteering for others than I was on myself. Now, I'm aware of this now, and I'm quite protective of my own time, as I gave up so much of myself that I eventually ended up completely dysfunctional. More on this story for my Patreon tigers. When you see me going into this troubleshooting mode, that's cognitive empathy kicking in. And it's also my way of trying to help, even if it doesn't match up with what someone else is expecting to see emotionally. So far, so uncontroversial, right? Autistic people often communicate and express emotions differently than neurotypical people. If you're like me, and remember, if you've met one autistic person, then you've met just one autistic person, then I might not make eye contact or smile or frown or do whatever it is with my body in the way that neurotypical people might expect to accompany certain emotions. Displaying empathy, like as an act, is an additional effort. It's kind of like masking, if you will, but experiencing and sharing the emotion underlying it, the actual empathy, is not. When my neurobiology was created, as though in a giant video game character creation sheet, one of the perks chosen for me, sort of accidentally, was delayed emotional processing. Sometimes it's a literal superpower. I've been involved in life-saving situations where I just follow my training as though I'm a programmed android. And sometimes, outside of those times, I break down uncontrollably. Usually it's a while after the event, when there's nothing apparent to cause me any upset at the time. Last week, Thomas Henley and I were at the gym, and we left at 9:33 p.m. Unfortunately, I'd driven us there, and the security shutter gates to the car park closed at 9:30 p.m. I had an overnight ferry to catch in a few hours. The general expectation at such times is to flap emotionally. Yeah, let's just say. We can't be having any of those actual hand flaps. I'm joking, of course. Stims help us to emotionally regulate, but I didn't need any emotional regulation to troubleshoot getting out. There was a hotel next door to the car park, so I called them and the receptionist told me it wasn't their problem and hung up on me. I called the local council office, but as expected at night time, no answer. A kind passerby who was staying at the hotel offered to try their keycard on the door, and it worked. Once in, I pressed the big green emergency exit button and we were out. Does anyone else somehow go into an automatic disassociation, as though that feeling of piloting a meat suit suddenly comes into a strong clarity and you just get through whatever challenge is ahead of you? It's like a monotropic focus state, but it's emotional. And at some point, not in my control, all the emotions that might be typically expected to work themselves out all emerge everywhere all at once. Sabre. He interrupts every single video, by the way. Every single time. Hopefully I'm on my own, somewhere quiet when this happens. People often expect an immediate emotional response, but for me, and for many others like me, it's more of a delayed download. You'll get it eventually, but it takes time to process. Do you know what I mean? Let me know in the comments below. It's not just me, right? Knowing that I have different, but not lesser emotional processes, and that I now have a label for this, allows me to plan for emotional downtime and to be kinder to myself when it inevitably happens. I am autistic, and I wish I knew this 2 decades ago. For decades, autism was primarily viewed through the medical lens as a disorder, often described in terms of deficits in social and emotional skills, for instance. This deficit model emphasises what autistic people may struggle with, for instance, emotional dysregulation, rather than on the diverse ways that they can experience and express emotion. Or what about being clear-headed in an emergency? Surely that's got to be worth some non-deficit points without being typecast in some data from Star Trek or Dr. House type of thing. I mean, they might have some autistic features and they're entertaining, but that's as far as it goes. One of the most important ideas to emerge in recent years is the double empathy problem, coined by Dr. Damien Milton in 2012. This theory suggests that the social communication difficulties between autistic and non-autistic individuals, they go both ways. There's takes two to tango. It's not just that autistic people struggle to understand neurotypical perspectives, therefore our deficits, but that neurotypical people often struggle to understand autistic ways of thinking and feeling. Both ways. I remember this one time I was hanging out with a group of friends at a dinner party. Everyone was chatting and catching up, but I was really focused on a project that I'd been working on earlier that day, something that had totally absorbed all of my attention earlier. I wasn't being rude, but I wasn't chiming in with the usual casual small talk, like the stuff that people expect. I was listening, just not interacting the way that everyone else was. After a while, one of my friends called me out in front of the group saying, "Hey Mike, you've been really, really quiet tonight. Are you mad at someone?" Thing is, I wasn't mad at all, but I could see that they were interpreting my quietness as me being upset or not enjoying myself. It felt really awkward at that moment, I think, because in my mind, I was just being myself, thinking deeply, paying attention in my own way, but I wasn't doing it in the whole neurotypical give and take banter of conversation. So in that moment, my friend assumed something was wrong. I tried to explain that I was just focused on something else, but they didn't quite get it. They thought I was avoiding someone in the group when in reality I was just enjoying being there in my own way. The funny thing is, if this had happened in a room full of autistic people, no one would have batted an eyelid, no one would give a shit. Everyone would be generally understanding that sometimes you just need space to think or focus, and it doesn't mean that you're disconnected or upset. But my friend was neurotypical. Their expectation of normal societal behaviour led to a miscommunication about what was actually happening. Whose fault was it? It's a perfect example of how miscommunication doesn't just come from the autistic side, it is mutual, and sometimes neurotypical expectations are the thing that creates the misunderstanding. Empathy breakdowns then can happen from both sides, and it's not the fault of one side or the other. Any breakdown in empathic understanding is mutual and tends to happen across ND-NT boundaries and not within the same neurotypes, like a group of autistic people together. On my Scratching Post Discord server, there are over 100 autistic people empathizing and supporting each other with no such empathy difficulties in sight. Some autistic individuals experience hyperempathy, where they feel the emotions of others too intensely, leading to overwhelm and burnout. This can sometimes result in avoidance behaviours or emotional shutdowns, which might be misinterpreted as a lack of empathy, when in fact it's a form of self-protection. I'm struggling to explain this, but it's not just that you feel someone's sadness, you feel it so strongly that it can physically drain you, like somebody's plugged into your emotional battery and they're siphoning out all your energy. Sometimes fiction can do this to me. I know it's a story written for entertainment, but occasionally I can feel utterly drained, especially if it includes themes about animals being hurt. Some shows I won't watch because I know this in advance. Okja is one I'm going to avoid until I'm fully charged. Another concept that might help clarify is called monotropism. This is a theory of autism that suggests that autistic individuals have often one single sort of deep focus on certain subjects or interests at a time. You're deep in focus. You've got, it's how autistic people allocate their attention differently and focus deeply on something. Now, while this deep focus can make someone seem disconnected from the surroundings or social cues, it doesn't mean that they're emotionless or without empathy. They might just be simply deep in focus. Now, I struggle to ensure that I drink and stay hydrated throughout the day, especially when I'm working and the hours just fly by. That's completely unnoticed by me, the passage of time. And my own bodily signals, and if I'm not picking up on those, then I'm going to struggle to pick up on the emotions of someone else vying for my attention. The first video on my channel was about monotropism for some very good and personal reasons. When we talk about autism, the language we use has a profound impact on how people with autism are viewed and treated by society. The words we choose shape how others see us, and they can either help to foster understanding and inclusion, or they can reinforce harmful stereotypes. And that's why it's so important to push back against outdated and ableist language that spreads the false idea that autistic people are cold, unfeeling, or lacking in empathy. Take Joe Rogan's comment about autistic people being automaton-like, for example.
I mean, if he was just like an automaton, like some, sociopathic, just super Alzheimer's guy, or autism guy.
It paints a picture that's not only inaccurate, but kind of harmful. This language isn't just a harmless mistake, it actively perpetuates ableism. Ableism, in case you aren't familiar with the term, is discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities, including autistic people. When we use terms that frame autism as a lack, like saying someone lacks empathy or has a deficit in social skills, we contribute to the idea that autistic people are broken versions of neurotypical people. But we're not broken. We experience and express empathy differently, and the challenges come from society's inability to recognise and accept those differences. Autistic people are often incredibly empathic. In fact, many of us work in fields where empathy is key. Social justice, caregiving, the arts, and advocacy. I mean, I couldn't do this YouTube channel without even a drop of empathy. Come on now. There are roles that require deep care and concern for the well-being of others. So when you suggest that autistic people are incapable of understanding or caring about the perspective of others, you're not just wrong, you're dismissing the valuable contributions that autistic people make every single day. When you constantly see characters on TV or film that are brilliant, but emotionally disconnected, it sends the message that autistic people can't be both intelligent and empathic. And that's simply not true. Many autistic individuals are deeply empathic, but they might express it in ways that might not fit the neurotypical mould. And that doesn't make their empathy any less real. Come to think of it, autistic love languages sometimes differ from neurotypical ones. If I should make a video about it, let me know in the comments section below. I actually kind of need an excuse to talk about autistic pebbling. Changing the language we use when talking about autism is more than just semantics. It's about shaping a more inclusive and accurate understanding of autistic people. Instead of saying that person lacks empathy, let's talk about different expressions of empathy. Instead of deficits in social communication, let's recognise different ways of connecting. By using language that affirms autistic people's strengths and acknowledges the unique ways they have of experiencing the world, we can shift perceptions and create a society where autistic people are understood and valued, not for how well they fit into a neurotypical expectation, but for who they truly are. The truth is, autistic people feel deeply. The ways we express that feeling might differ from neurotypical expectations, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Words matter, and they can either build up or break down understanding. If you've ever felt like you were taking on someone else's emotions so deeply that you needed to shut down, you're not alone. It doesn't mean that you didn't care. Watch this video next. It's about how some of us protect ourselves from absorbing these feelings. Bye.